Welcome to session 6. Now we have Tony Krepler, who's the BIM manager at FJC Studio. It used to be FJMT, and a lot of people would be well familiar with some of the work that FJMT have done. I think they're actually on the box of one of the last Archicad releases from memory. I can't remember the numbers. It's kind of a bit of a blur to me these days. But we all want to try and get more out of Archicad. And in a similar approach to the other Tony, funny enough, the Tonys are kind of taking a kind of approach to how we can improve getting more out of Archicad. So we've got both Tonys having an opportunity to kind of share some thoughts about how we can get more out of our software. So enjoying actually having Tony finally present at one of my events. I know he's been busy a lot of the times I've asked him in the past to participate. So it's great to finally have Tony up on stage. So take it away, Tony.
Hello everyone around the globe. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. Welcome to the FJC Studio presentation at the Archi Intensive Conference. My name is Tony Krepler and I'm a Design Technology Lead at FJC Studio. Today, I would like to talk about the automation of a few of our processes in Archicad. But first, let me acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm currently presenting from, in particular, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would like to pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. You might have heard of FJMT Studio before, and you might have heard that the FJMT Studio has been renamed to FJC Studio recently to recognize a change in the leadership of the company. We are a multidisciplinary practice with studios in Sydney and Melbourne in Australia and in Oxford in the UK. We work on a wide range of project types: commercial, educational, cultural, health, residential, you name it. Our journey started in 2000 when the Sydney studio of Mitchell, Georgia and Thorpe reformed as FJMT. Also in 2000, we started to work with Archicad, and we modeled our project quite to a detail. And as you can see, we created some nice work with it. From 2010 onwards, we started to use BIM coordination, in particular exchanging IFC files with consultants and contractors. And as you can see, we started with an easy job with a small building, which turned out rather nice. It is actually in Sydney, CBD, and won a couple of awards as well. From 2013, we started to use Grasshopper to create some generative elements in our buildings. Also in 2013, we won the Building of the Year award at the World Architectural Festival for the Auckland Art Gallery, which looked also nice in Archicad, but even nicer on the photo, as you can see. As a practice with multiple locations, we were very excited about the full-blown BIM cloud and became probably one of the first adapters of it in 2014. In 2017, we made it to the Archicad 21 box cover with the Charles Perkins Centre building in the Sydney University campus, and it also has won a couple of architecture awards. Last year, we formed a technology-minded group, the FJMT Lab, which also has been renamed to FJC Lab, and it has got different sections. And in the BIM section, it is two of us, my colleague Mateusz and myself, but there are other contributors to it across the studios. People who are Archicad enthusiasts, even Grasshopper experts or BIM Collab champions, or just model managers within Archicad. Let me show you a couple of our milestone projects with Archicad. The EY Centre in 200 George Street in Sydney has been finished in 2016. And this screenshot was captured from BIMAX. And as you can see, it is not very different from the actual building. The actual building has got a quite complicated facade system, which unfortunately hasn't been modeled with the curtain wall tool in Archicad. But there were other interesting features of the building, which were modeled in Archicad with a wide range of tools. Sometimes you have to get quite inventive with how you work with certain tools like slab tool or wall tool. The lobby of the EY Centre is featuring a beautiful large Aboriginal artwork, and as you can see on the right hand side, even the lift has got a quite elaborate design. 200 George Street was also a heavily BIM collaboration project, also in the design and the construction phases. In 2014, we have been awarded with the Building 2 of UTS, and we designed almost everything in Archicad in it, apart from that double helix stair, which you see around at the bottom middle of the model. Actually, there are two of them in the building. Unfortunately, back then when we started it, there was no stair tool, so that double helix stair was actually modeled with Grasshopper. On the other side of the building, you can see a strange feature on the facade. This strange feature is a shadow device on the facade of a library, because that library gets quite full sun, especially in the summer. And this shadow device, as you can see, can close when the sun is out and can open when the sun is not out. The shadow device, the shadow protection device, was also modeled in Grasshopper, and there is a whole story about it on the Parametric Monkey, if you're interested in it, because the production of the shadow device was also quite challenging. What I would like to show you is that it actually made it into the Archicad model, and it made it with all the parameters of it, so it was closing, or we were able to close it as well to see the effect of the shadow device within our model. Obviously, there has been an intensive BIM collaboration during the design and the construction phase, but that is not the reason why I have this image here on this slide. We usually don't import IFC models from services consultants, and not even from the structural engineer, because they make the model quite heavy. So what did we do? Well, we had to import these services consultants models into the building because we had open ceilings, so we had to show these pipes work in the ceilings. What we did was we imported the IFC files into a separate Archicad file, and we hot linked that separate Archicad file into the main model. Obviously, you have to be quite careful with the libraries, because if you're not careful, then the embedded libraries get quite heavy and the model comes to a stall, as we also experienced ourselves. It is a very interesting project, what you see on the screen. Bungie Place in KC, Victoria, which is about 30 kilometers away from the Melbourne CBD. The reason I included it is because this is the first BIM cloud project we worked on, and it also heavily featured Grasshopper, as you can see on the images. And if you're wondering whether this wooden structure was just a feature or structural, I can assure you it was also structural. Currently, we are working on, among other projects, a twin tower in Brisbane on the waterfront at Eagle Street. And we are working in joint venture with another architect. And they are working on the podium of this project. And as it happens, quite often they're working with Revit. So, although we are a huge advocates of Open BIM, and we're trying to work with Revit consultants, exchanging IFC files, unfortunately, sometimes it is not enough. So this is the collaboration diagram of the Eagle Street project. It is quite complex, as you can see, and yes, we are exchanging Revit files with the consultants. There was another project, which I cannot talk more about as a project, but the collaboration between Archicad and Revit, or more particular BIM 360, was quite interesting. Let me tell you a little bit about it, because that also featured a lot of automation in the process. So what was required, we had to give a Revit model, and that Revit model had to sit in the BIM 360 or Autodesk Construction Cloud, and it had to be a published Revit file. And when you just save or export a Revit file from Archicad, then that is not qualified. That doesn't qualify as a published Revit file in the BIM 360 cloud. So we opened that Revit file in Revit, and we found that there are quite a few challenges with it. Apart from the fact that it wasn't a published Revit file. So first of all, before Archicad 26, the exported Revit file didn't include any stories. I mean, all the elements were on one stories. And obviously that's not good enough. There is another challenge or problem, which I didn't include here because we sort of ignored it, that the elements in the exported Revit file are all distinct families. So each element is a different family, a separate family in the exported Revit file, which is a nightmare. But in this project, we could get away without that, changing that. A challenge on the other side was that the joint venture partner was required to edit the properties, so the metadata contained in the elements. And as they are exported from the Archicad file, it is simply not possible to edit them in Revit. So that was something we had to overcome. Also, when you export zones in the Revit file, they become general elements in Revit. Say that wasn't good either. The model location at the beginning when we set up the file was fine, but then our joint venture partner had to change the location of the file in Revit, which is in a Revit environment an easy thing because you work with shared coordinates. But for us, it actually meant a challenge because our model arrived at the wrong place. So what did we do? We exported a wide range of files, quite a few files, which made the process a little bit slow for us. So we exported model data via Excel. Why via Excel? Because it was actually faster to save an Excel file from or publish an Excel file from a schedule than saved the IFC file with all the data. That is proving to be very slow in Archicad. But we did save IFC models. One was an empty IFC model with all the stories in it. So that's how we could manage to put the right elements onto the right stories. And we also extracted the model location from the Revit file from our joint venture partner it was Excel format as far as I can remember. So all these data was massaged with the Dynamo and squashed into our Revit file, which eventually we published into the BIM 360 cloud. But let me talk about automation in Archicad, especially how we solved the circulation spaces with our FJC's doors. So the Australian standard is quite specific about the door types which are requiring access spaces. It's mainly just swinging, surface sliding, and cavity sliding doors, which are also known as pocket doors in Archicad. And the Australian standard is luckily quite parametric. One of the parameters is the clear opening, which is easy to get from the door object or door library part. And it defines 4 approach directions. So which way are you approaching the door from the hinge, the latch side, or is it required to be able to approach the door from both sides, or from front, which is a usual situation in corridors. Also, it defines that there are 2 options in terms of the door leaf and the approach direction. So when you approach the door and the door leaf is opening away from you, like on the diagram on the left on this slide, then it is an away position, and if you are approaching the door and the leaf is opening towards you, that's a towards situation. So we created a range of FJC doors, and we didn't create all the door types with the swinging doors. Only a handful of them, because we are using only a handful of them in our projects. We almost never use, or actually never use, an arch top door, for instance. So we started with this palette of the swinging doors, and so far there was no requirement to extend the collection. And we created the the surface sliding and the pocket doors, or exterior sliding and pocket doors, as FJC doors as well. Basically, we saved them from the Graphisoft doors. That's why you see the preview icons are so familiar for you. And the Graphisoft headquarters GDL team has helped us a lot. So a big thank you goes to them. While I'm here, let me also say a big thank you to Phil Green, who was my predecessor at FJC, or back then it was FGMT, who started this whole project basically with one door, which was a fantastic door. But then we decided to go for the more door and try to rely on a much simpler situation on the Graphisoft macros, as you will see in my chart later on. So a quick sort of video about how they work in Archicad. Here is a pivot door, which is an FJC pivot door. And the parameters, when you want to set up the circulation spaces, are hidden in the description panel in the end of the list. We couldn't really manage to put them into, or instead of the circulation spaces or panel in the door settings. And here you just define the approach direction for the door as per the Australian standards, and click OK, and you think that everything is fine. Well, it is actually, but the access spaces are visible only when you show them by the model view options. We have got our model view option panel, the FJC library control, as you can see, and the selected model view option combination is showing the settings for the AS 1428, which started from 2009 in the form that you can see today. And when you turn it on, then you can see that the doors have got the access spaces around them as per required. Here there is a door for which I already defined in my little test project the access spaces earlier, and you can see it doesn't comply. So what can you do? Well, you can actually just click the access space hotspot, and you can place the door into a correct position. So what are the benefits of working with this automated standard or built-in standard? It's easy to work with because you don't have to look up and enter numbers. You just define the access directions, and that makes less room for errors as well. Part of the door. It is part of the door, the access space. That means that it helps us to position correctly according to the 1428 Australian standard. And while the whole solution revolves around the model view options, that makes it easy to turn the access space visibility on off. Like I promised, here's a sneak preview or view under the hood, how it is working. So, like I said, there was the graphics of door, and the graphics of door is a library part which is calling a lot of macros. And we resaved that library part as an FJC library part. We put into it a few information to work a little smoother for us with the, for instance, with the access spaces, so that the access spaces are getting some extra information from the actual door type, and the FJC door is calling on the Graphisoft macros and also some extra macros, which are FJC macros. And obviously it is requesting parameters from the FJC model view options panel. That's how it can decide whether it is necessary to show the access spaces, for instance, or not. And the access spaces are just one of the macros in the FJC door macros collection. Nowadays, the model is more important than the pretty drawings. So we were asked by a contractor if we could provide the access spaces required by the Australian standards as part of the door model as well. And we did. And we created this nice green spaces around the door. And the green surface is defined, obviously, by the FJC library control, so the model view options. And if you don't like this nice transparent green surface, then you can change it to something else. I would like to note here that the FJC door spaces in the floor plan are using the same graphical settings as the minimal spaces of the other Archicad library parts, because the FJC door reads not just the FJC library controls, so model view option panel, but also the standard Archicad library ones, and we wanted to make it conform with the other spaces in our floor plans. What else can the FJC door do for you? Well, it can show something in a structure view. You're probably familiar with the term of concrete set-out drawings. We also create concrete set-out sections, and you can see the doors convert to an empty door with a cross there. The reason is that they read in that model view option the concrete set-out drawing. So previously you saw a general arrangement option working there, and the drawing type was now the concrete set-out, which applies more often to the doors than anything else in our design. It is quite important that the red cross, which is our internal standard for such drawings, is part of the door and not an extra element there. So it makes life much easier for my colleagues. Finally, let me tell you about some automations in our zone label, how it is changing its content view by view. Well, before Archicad 25 with the Archicad library zone stamp, it was quite impossible to show different contents view by view. So my predecessors, Phil Green and Owen Sharp, hello, and if you are watching this, have created an FJMT zone stamp, which we would call FJC zone stamp nowadays. And that was able to show different content view by view, as you can see on the screen now. We kept this feature in our new zone labels, which we created in Archicad 25. It was quite rewritten from the start, from scratch. And let me show you how does it work. So in this little model, I've got a couple of zones, and here's a zone and here's a label. And if I select this label and I change the view, you can be sure that I'm showing you the same label with a different content. Where does this different content come from? This different content comes from the settings within the FJC library controls, the model view options again. And if I turn off this panel, then you can see that the contents of the label are corresponding with the ticked boxes in the FJC library controls. Let's just turn this panel back, and there you can see that there are in our template quite a few options to show different content for our colleagues, which is quite required during the design phase. How does the zone get this information from the library controls? Well, there are three settings: auto, on, or off. If the content setting is set to auto, then it is getting it from the FJC library control. What you see at the moment is that also the story number can be automatically put into the zone label if the zone is shown, if the story is named in a special way. Here you can see that this zone label has got some of the parameters turned off, so that's why it is not showing the area and the briefed area in it. So where is the briefed area coming from? The briefed area comes from the properties section of the zone settings, where we have got quite a few properties for zones as well. Why is the briefed area and the measured area showing in red? Well, because they are quite different in value. As a matter of fact, they both red when the difference is more than 5%. But if I change the size of the zone so that the area is much closer to the measured area, the briefed area is, and the measured area are much closer in value, under the 5%, then both of them turn back to black. Another feature in the zone label is that when the zone label is at inconvenient place, as you can see at the bottom there, this zone label is hiding parts of the table and the chairs. You can place it in different positions in different views. So we have got basically 4 different labels on sort of layers within the label. And at the moment, what you saw was the label on the first layer. But if I change to the second layer, then nothing changes because it is appearing at the same position as the default of the first label. But if you change the position of the second label, as you can see on this little video, then you can see that when I'm changing back to another model view option, where the model view is showing the first label layer, then the label is going back to that first position. So with the help of this, you can actually show the zone label in different positions, in different views, depending on the space requirement of it. Again, that space requirement. And at crowded places, it is a real blessing for my colleagues, as they said. Well, with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and looking forward to your questions.